Hi, I'm Dave.
I'm Paul. BBE Sound here. Now today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the soul vibe. Talk a little bit about the controls on the front, crack open the back of the thing, talk a little bit about a trim pot that's on the inside, kind of a magical thing for us. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we came up with the soul vibe in the first place, or why we decided to even make it. I think Dave and I were working together on some pedal ideas. And you know, you listen to these great songs, this, you know, some of the Hendrix tunes, some of the Robin Trower and Bridge of Sighs in particular, and you hear these great uni-vibe sounds. So our goal was to, well, let's recreate the sound. Let's start looking at some of the circuitry behind it.
Soul Vibe, based on a 1960s, late 60s uni-vibe circuit, made very, very popular by players such as Jimi Hendrix, Robin Trower, just name a few, David Gilmour. And basically, the idea behind the Soul Vibe was to come up with a compact version for your pedal board so that, number one, you don't have all of the drawbacks of an original. And if there's anybody who knows anything about going through many different versions of them and original ones, is us. During the basic idea of this, we collaborated and got as many uni-vibe copies as well as some original uni-vibes together to kind of see what made the magic happen. And of course, going through a lot of those older units, we noticed a lot of inconsistencies in terms of its response, really. So Paul here, I know when we were going through, especially its, what do you call that? Like its waveform, or that gives it its...
Yeah, we started examining the oscillators that were driving these optical units in there. That creates the little notches and all that swirling and kind of vibrato sound there. And so, you know, you start gathering up data. The sine wave oscillator that was driving this incandescent lamp, and they had all these 4 photocells kind of grouped all around them. And boy, depending on the angle of these photocells and the particular lamp that was in there and any of the tolerances in the actual circuitry of it, these things varied widely. You know, we would get some drop $1,500 for a uni-vibe, get it in here, and it, quite frankly, sounded pretty bad. And so we just said, well, let's just work on some circuitry that gets the sound we're looking for and not focus so much on, let's make sure we get every single component exactly like in the original. Because quite frankly, it's real tough to do that. It's more important to get it to sound the way that you remember a uni-vibe sounding on the records that you love.
The heart of the Soul Vibe, as in any vibe, uni-vibe copy out there, is basically kind of concentrated on the 4 photocells along with an incandescent lamp that all of these units seem to share. Now, in the development stage of this, we were noticing just a lot of changes from unit to unit to unit to unit. And of course, I was kind of like, why does this happen? And of course, Paul came up with a really, really great idea of how to really make that tolerance very, very, very small. So,
yeah, what's interesting on these things is that, you know, people kept saying, oh, it's just absolutely imperative that you have these 4 photocells kind of standing up in this little metal box and have an incandescent lamp in the middle of it, because that's the most important thing. So, well, no, the most important thing is that when you plug your guitar in and the output goes over to your amp, it creates that sound that you remember hearing on all the records that you love. That's the important part. Now, how do you get there? Trying to do it with the photocells, that's just way too random. And some of these incandescent bulbs, like I said, the tolerances for this type of circuitry is really all over the map, as we were able to find with all these original uni-vibes getting in and testing them. So thinking, why don't we use some of the kind of modern electronics where they put photocells locked into a plastic housing and put an LED in front of it so that you know it's always the same response every time. And so actually, if you look inside of one of these guys, you'll see that we have, you know, a couple of these cats sitting right here. Basically, that's what they are. They're photocells that are locked inside of a plastic housing, always the same distance from this little LED that will fluctuate the resistance value of that photocell, which in turn moves little notches in the circuitry around, gives you the sound that you're looking for every time. We went a little bit further with some of the circuitry, which we can talk about later, by adding a trim pot in there to kind of put these notches in areas that you may favor, because a lot of guys, they'll find their magical uni-vibe and say, oh, this one just has the perfect tone, and another guy goes, well, that sounds like it's a little bright to me. And the guy goes, no, this is the perfect one. He goes, that sounds a little dark to me. So let's put a trimmer in the thing so we can place this voicing either on the higher side or on the lower side, or it comes stock kind of in the middle area, which we like the best, and which reminds us the most of the songs we love. And so we thought, this is the proper way of doing this, because remember, your goal here at the very end of this process is to have a pedal. You plug your guitar in, you come in out of the output, you go into your amplifier, boom, you have the sound that you love.
Soul Vibes feel. If there's anything about the vibes that I think all of us know about, is its feel. If it doesn't feel right, if it sounds too symmetrical, like it doesn't have what some people consider like a lopsided heartbeat, or that hum 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 hum. I like to call it like a drunken sailor thing, where it feels hypnotic and you kind of get this wooziness going on, which is very essential to us when we were voicing it. For me, it was like, okay, does it do Breathe? Right? Does it do the Breathe thing, the Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon? Does it do Machine Gun? Can it replicate Bridge of Sighs? Right? And anything in between, like kind of what they considered it to be, a rotary speaker simulator back in the late 60s. Very, very cool idea. But one thing we noticed when we started using these octo isolators, correct, was that the consistency of it was so strong that it didn't quite have everything it needed to be exact. And that's kind of when we were going round and round, letting people check it out. Everybody around here was saying, well, yeah, it sounds really great. But for some reason, there was that little bit of feel there that I was like going, okay, no, it's got to have that. And Paul one day, I remember, came after a weekend and just picked it up, and I said, oh, you got an idea? He says, I think I have an idea. So it was really, really magical, because as soon as, that was almost like the turning point, I thought, to me, when he took it, he tweaked it, and when I got it, it was like, it was via Soul Vibe. So I'll let Paul kind of elaborate on what he did. Yeah,
it was funny. Usually, if I came back from a weekend and I knew David was going to come right over by my bench and stand there staring at me, I knew that there was a whole bunch of extra work I was going to be doing that day. So we started talking about and hearing people make the comments of, oh, well, if you got an LED in photo cells, that's just totally different. That's just not going to be the same magic vibe. It's like, no, the end result is what we're after. What we may have to do is modify how we're driving these LEDs. And so what I ended up with was a kind of a modified sine wave oscillator that would kind of simulate how an incandescent bulb would slowly kind of glow, and then it would, as the oscillator went back down, the lamp didn't immediately go dark, it would slowly discharge itself there. And so creating this kind of modified sine wave oscillator really is when it began to take shape. And so now we could just always repeat that same kind of swirling effect, time after time, no matter how many pedals we built up. And it's like, okay, there we go. Now that's that little missing magical part there. So that was quite exciting, I thought.
We're going to talk about the features of the Soul Vibe. As with all BBE pedals, you have the true bypass feature. So you have what comes in, goes out, with no other artificial colorings, as we like to say. And that is with the entire BBE line of pedals. The Soul Vibe in particular has two main controls. One is the speed control, and the other is the intensity control. Speed obviously controls the speed of the oscillator. Thank you, Paul. And the intensity knob, very much just like the original, basically controls the exaggeration of
the notches.
The notches. There you go. And one cool feature that we implemented into this was, when you're playing, and sometimes you don't always, have time to make sure that your settings are correct. But one cool thing about this is that the LED is not only an on and off, but it is also a speed control indicator. So that'll fluctuate based on your setting. So you'll be able to see that whenever you're playing, which is kind of cool. And it's blue. Gotta love that. Anyways, another great feature, obviously, is the 9-volt DC inlet. And it does have a very easy access battery compartment with a non-slip rubber back. And last but not least, the coolest part, I think, of this, I think we implemented this very kind of like right before it went off to be produced, was the idea to give people some flexibility in terms of how the notches, or where the notches
Yeah,
are.
where they're favoring. Again, we had this area where we were getting all these uni-vibes in, and you know, some of these, boy, they're up in the upper register. They sound really nice and kind of clear. Others were voiced a little bit deeper, and depending on who you talk to, they would prefer the deeper tone or the brighter tone. And so, naturally, it's thinking, well, why don't we just put a little trim control right inside of the unit that adjusts the brightness of these LEDs and then shifts where those notches are going to occur. We, at factory set in the middle, which is kind of right where the sweet spot, I like to call it, of where the notches will drift. And if you want to favor the upper register, then you just turn the trimmer clockwise, and that makes the LEDs shift these notches a little higher in the frequency register. And if you want to bring it back down lower, you just turn it counterclockwise. You know, certain pickups and certain guitars will maybe have kind of a thick, dark tone, and you maybe want to brighten it up, so you could go inside and just tweak that trimmer clockwise just a touch to kind of brighten it up. If you don't feel comfortable messing with it, don't, of course. It comes in a really good spot. It will sound great, but if you have a guitar where you're just going, boy, I just really need this to be maybe a little bit darker sounding, then just turn it counterclockwise a touch.
And, you know, just to kind of end it all there, what's really cool about this feature for me was the fact that sometimes there's this element, like we were talking about, like with Breathe, where I hear this wash. It's not just this lopsided heartbeat, but it is this top end, almost very watery sounding phasing effect that to me is very important to a uni-vibe, is having that heartbeat and then having the wash, what I call it. So this is very, very instrumental, I think, depending on the instrument that you're playing as well. If it's a bright instrument to begin with, it may be more apt to pick up those types of you know, harmonics, I guess, and if otherwise you can kind of cheat it to that side of things to where you start to hear more of the wash and a little less of the heartbeat, so you can kind of balance it out better. But it is a very effective control when used that way, so have some fun.